couple years ago, Raleigh Parsons and I took a field trip, and we went to a church in South Bend called St. Paul's Memorial Church. The reason we went up there, this was we were looking at contractors to do the upgrades on our windows. You know, we put the storm systems in, our windows look really good now. Well, this was kind of leading up to that, and we wanted to see some work that this company had done, and they referred us to this company, or this church in South Bend that is, it's St. Paul's Memorial Church. And a couple of cool things about this church was it was built pretty close in time to this church. 1903 they built this. This church was built in 1910. And one of the key players in this church was a guy by the name of Clem Studebaker. Clem Studebaker had a business, and his business was building wagons and wagon wheels back in the early century. Well, you know what happened? They turned that wagon business into a what business? And a car business. That was the Studebaker South Bend car business. And this church was just, it was just beautiful. You can see in the lower left-hand corner there, you can see the beautiful organ there. They just had completed a $450,000 renovation to just the organ, just to get the organ working right. $450,000 to fix this thing. Stained glass windows everywhere. The place, you can see, kind of tell by the number of seats in their balcony. It's kind of hard to get perspective there a little bit, but it's a large place with seat somewhere between 600 and 700 people. But central to the church is this. They're kind of known for this window that is on, I don't know, one of the sides of the church here. And that's a blow-up of this window. And Clem Studebaker, during this time, went over to Germany for whatever reason. And he went to a church there, and he saw this stained glass company made this window. And he was so fascinated by it, he hired this company to build a similar window and put it in this church in South Bend. And so the cost of the window in 3 or 4 was $40,000 for that, which would be over $1 million today that he did this to bring this into this church. He died before the church was complete, but to kind of commemorate Clem Studebaker, he's actually in the picture. I mean, the picture is actually from Bible times, but if you can kind of follow the arrow down there's a guy that's in a blue robe who's way out of character because it'd be almost 2,000 years later that he's in the scene that's in this Bible story of this church. And so it's kind of a fascinating thing there. And the reason I show you that is because that scene that is central to that church comes from the book of Acts, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The story that picture comes from. I was fascinated because we got to see such an emphasis on that story to this church at the time. So if you have your Bibles, this is from Acts in chapter 14. And I have most of this on the screen if you want to follow along. A lot of it's in your bulletin as well, or you can use your text too. So verse 16 says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, well, you have to go back a little bit to see who the them is, and just a little bit of background. Paul has been preaching in Greece. He's been all throughout Greece. If you back up just a little bit before this, you'll find out that he's been in Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea. He's been there, and so all these stories that would have come before then indicate to us that at this point he's been all the way around Greece. But some security stuff kind of pops up. The disciples and Paul's feeling threatened a little bit, and so for security reasons they say, Paul, let's get out of here, go down south, get to the coast, get away from some of this problem that is happening there, and wait for us. And so he's there waiting for Silas and Timothy. So that's why he's there. And it says Paul was deeply distressed to see that the city, which Athens, was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and with the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Also some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debated with him. Some said, what does this babbler want to say? Another says he seems to be proclaiming foreign divinities. This was because Paul was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So I had to do a little scratching around here, it talks about some of the people in the crowd here were these Stoics and the Epicureans. The Stoics were a group of people who their thinking was really based on the power of nature. They wanted to be one with Mother Earth kind of thing. Probably today you'd liken them to the people that are really into the green, the green look that we hear today, and maybe natural medicines and those kinds of things. It'd be probably liken those type of people there. They put a lot of emphasis on what humanity could do together, and no doubt we have people in our cultures that would be sort of that same way, naturalistic kinds of people, focused on self-sufficiency, being able to do stuff ourselves or as collective humanity. Those were the Stoics. That's who was in the crowd and hearing Paul preach and asking him some questions. The other group, the Epicureans, these guys were really focused on what they really centered their life on was pleasure and their passions. All kinds of things that they were looking for to focus on what would make them feel good, sensually, and probably partying. A lot of good food parties and drinking kind of parties here, and that was what would have focused the Epicureans' way of thinking. And again, they're in this audience that's questioning Paul, and Paul brings this this new kind of thought. And here we have this Jewish person who comes from Tarsus. That would have been Paul. And this message probably was irritating these people a little bit. They would have just not had probably an appeal to this message because it kind of messed a little bit with the way they thought. And so then you see where this tension would have come from and why they're questioning Paul in these regards. So we go on here. So it says, verse 19, so they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, which is just this, I looked this up too, that's a stone mountain that's in Athens where it looks like a lot of people went there just for discussions, just to go to this place, and no doubt there would have been temples and shrines and those kinds of things around, but they go there to talk, and they asked him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us, so we would like to know what it means. Now, all the Athenians and foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. So Paul's kind of put in the limelight. He's at the front and center here of this crowd of people that want something from him. Explain this teaching to us. Luke is the author of Acts, and he's telling us that so many in this crowd, they're just focused on something new. And that's probably why they ask the questions, because here comes Jesus, here comes Paul, this guy with this new teaching about Jesus, and it's kind of new, and it kind of tickles their ears a little bit, and they want to hear some more about this. And some in the crowd, they're focused on, naturalism. Some are focused on, the things that they can see, and some are focused on, how we can reason through these things. And they have this emphasis on humanity. Others in the crowd have this focus on pleasures and, how it is we can party and these kinds of things. But this idea that they want this thing that's new, what's trending? That's probably kind of the buzz in the crowd. Hey, what's the latest kind of thought that's going on? What's most current? I want to go hear this thing. And that's why they would have found themselves at this place. I thought that's a lot about how kind of we work with fashion. People kind of want to find out what's trending and what's hip or what's current. And I want to be part of that. I want to make sure that the way I dress or the way I decorate my house or, the car I drive or whatever, that it's trending, what's popular. And it seems to me that's sort of driving a little bit these people behind Paul at this Areopagus. So Paul stands up and says this. He says, Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. And by the way, that window in that South Bend church, the inscription at the bottom of that is that verse right there. Because that's the key verse that he said to these people. What therefore you worship is unknown. He found it fascinating that here was this temple or this shrine set up for an unknown God. He says, therefore you worship what is unknown. This I proclaim to you. Indicating what you call unknown, I know. I want to share it with you. And so he goes on and does just that. Verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth. And he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of their places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he's not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. For we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he's fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And for this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. So Paul finds himself in this culture that he's somewhat familiar with. You know, he's familiar with this kind of Greek culture, but he's surrounded also by people with a completely different worldview or a belief system than what he would have. And what does he do? He begins to share the story of Christ with them. And what I just think is very fascinating about that scene that we saw depicted in that stained glass window is really, when it comes down to it, there's such a close parallel to what Paul was facing with his crowd and what we face in our crowds too. It isn't that much different. We don't wear togas and the thing around our heads. We don't have that. But there's so many similarities. I want to expound on that just a little bit. Paul's being, he's being prodded by this crowd, much like our world. These communities of Greece here would be splattered here with all these shrines and temples to literally hundreds of gods or deities. And these gods would have a various limits on power or a particular focus on what it is that they were a god of. And we've got in the bottom there, those are today's pictures of some of those temples and shrines. It just would have been all over Greece. So Paul's been preaching in this environment with all these different forms of theism. And those gods were different things. Some of them, he had the god of the sky and the god of wind and the god of sea, the god of dreams, the god of strength, of sleep, the god of the dead, the god of fire, the god of time, the god of luck, the god of war, and so on. Those were all these various Greek gods that the culture would have built these shrines to or temples to, and that's what it was that they worshipped. They were polytheists, many gods. That's what Paul would have been confronting there. And now he's bringing a message that would definitely counter that. These gods that the audience of Paul would have been talking to, they would have come up and they would have had areas of focus that they would have worshipped those gods on. And that's exactly what gods do. What is it that I allow to have power over me? That's what a God would do. Anything that would have power over you would be a god. Anything that you would submit to, these people would have been submitting at these shrines and at these temples. That would have been a god. Anything that you choose to worship or put first, that's what these people in Paul's crowd would have been doing, would have been a god. And that worship can take on a lot of different forms. We are here worshiping today. But when you think about what worship really is, what is it that you devote yourself to? And so these Athenians and these Stoics and these Epicureans, all the people that were there, the thing that they would have been devoting themselves to would be their God. The thing that they would have invested their energy in, or their very self, or their very time that they have. And to me, I believe that you and I It's no different today. I think we can ask the same kind of questions that we could ask these people. Who is your God? Well, I think we have the same kind of thing here. What is it that we're devoted to in 2020? What is it we invest our time in? What is it that we submit ourselves to? I don't think we have the kind of shrines that we would have seen in that picture, those boxes that were made out of wood or marble. But maybe I could say the shrines that we have today kind of look like this, or my cell phone, or a TV. You know, the things that I spend an awful lot of time looking at and investing my time in, it seems like comes from those kinds of things. Our temples probably aren't the kinds of things that are made with those cool stone colonnades that we saw there, the really neat Greek architecture kind of thing, but perhaps the temples that we would have might look an awful lot like football stadiums or basketball arenas or college buildings or a restaurant or a bar or our businesses or even our houses. Those can actually become a form of a temple. All of those gods in Paul's day may look a little bit different than ours. You know, we don't necessarily have a god of luck or a god of smoke or whatever. We don't have that. But I would suggest that maybe what our gods are sports. We spend a lot of time investing in that. Celebrities, entertainment, the whole Hollywood picture here. You can kind of see some of these things in that collage up there. Alcohol or drugs are something I can invest so much of my time and my being in that can dominate my life. It becomes a god. Money, your business, your career, your home, your family. Your family can become your god. We end up sometimes, chasing all of these things that we do as families. No doubt those things can be good things, but when it comes first, then it becomes a god. Education can become a god. Science can become a god. Our health, the amount of time we spend in the gym and trying to eat the right stuff and the perfect diet plan and so on can become a god. Our possessions can become a god. I think for a lot of us, our government can become a god. We put so much emphasis in our governmental leaders that's where the answer is, and that's the answer to our culture, is what our politics and what our politicians can do. And I'll see. A month from now, we'll see that. Election day, these people, they go to these places and they get all lathered up when their politician is winning, or they completely break down and freak out when there's loses, because that party or that particular individual has become their god. Now, that doesn't mean that politics are all wrong, but when it comes first and when it becomes the place where you're investing most and what it is that you really submit your thinking to, then it's when it becomes a god. This is a little bit off the wall, but does anybody remember the show Romper Room? You remember that? There was that show where it was a kids show, and they do cartoons and they do educational kinds of things. At the very end of the show, the teacher would have that magic mirror. Did anybody remember this besides me? I hope somebody did. I seem to, okay, yeah, Romper Room. And this thing was really cool because she had some sort of magic power that when, she'd look through it, she could look right out to the TV and she'd talk to the people that was out in TV. Say, hey, I see Andrew, and Andrew's having a great day, and I see Jill, and she's having a wonderful day, and I see Raleigh, but that's next week. We got a whole day for him. That's Raleigh Day next week, so he gets next week. But no, she would do that. Somehow she had this magic where she could peer out through the television. I'm not really that hurt, but she never called my name. Romper Room. She had this mirror. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a mirror like this where we could look inside people to find out what their God was? What is it that as we look through here and we look at the people in our culture, what is it that they submit to? What is it that they hold most important in their lives? What's first and foremost in their lives? Where's their heart? Where's their passion? Wouldn't it be interesting if we could have a magic mirror that we could find out what people were really devoted to? I think then we would know what God is that person's God. It would reveal what was most important to them. And I think we would find all kinds of things. And that's why I bring that up because I don't think it's that much different than what Paul was speaking to in his time, because he was speaking to a group of people that had all these different gods, and they worshiped different things, and they put these gods first and foremost. And I think today in our culture, if we could do that, this is what we would find. We would find people that would have those kinds of things as their gods. Sports is first, or my portfolio is first, or my family is first, or my relationships are first. I think a magic mirror would reveal that, and it's kind of scary. But then Paul focuses with his group on the one. He pulls that one out, and I'm sure he kind of had to chuckle a little bit that, all these temples and all this stuff, and they make one up here, and they say to an unknown God. It's sort of funny there by itself. And that's the one he focuses on, to an unknown God, and he goes on and tells them, what you call unknown, let me tell you, I know who it is, and I want to reveal it to you. And he goes on, he shares Christ with people. Well, I believe today we have the same kind of parallel. No, I don't. If I came to your houses with my magic mirror and looked, I don't think I'd find a shrine that would say, I believe wholeheartedly in an unknown God. I don't think that's what we would find. But I think today there is a tremendous parallel in our cultures that's an awful lot like that. And we'd label it like that, what that shrine says there. I put it up big and in the middle. And what it is, it's this God that we have would tell us this: believe whatever you want to believe. That's a very powerful philosophy that you and I live in this culture. Moral relativism, a big fancy word there, that basically says, you know what? There's no real absolute truth. What I choose to believe, it's okay. And what you choose to believe, it's okay. Whatever anybody else wants to believe, that's fine. You're free to choose what your own truth is. It's up to each person to decide what they believe. And am I really my brother's keeper? And do I need to share my religion or jam my religion down their throat? That kind of thought goes along with this very popular view that is in our culture that says, believe whatever you want to believe. It's really up to you. You get this freedom to choose. And unfortunately, really to be a follower of Christ, that's not consistent with what this says. This faith that you and I adhere to, it is exclusive. It is exclusive. There are those in and there are those out. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He didn't say I'm a way. I am the way. It is exclusive, but that's just a given here, and that's counter to what that false god says right there. So I claim that there really is there's not a lot of difference between what you and I face in our world and what Paul would have been facing in Athens. So many other gods, so many other ways of thinking, and such a prominent philosophy that you and I have here that believe what you want to believe. And I really throw this out there, and I believe it in my heart that I think that issue right there is the center of so many of the problems that you and I hear about and face. All people are created for the purpose of connecting with their Creator. We're wired that way. Every human being is wired that way. But unfortunately, what people end up doing is not connecting with their Creator. They're connecting with parts of the creation. Things. And that's causing so many problems in our world. But what Paul does, what he does in this situation, which I think is so fascinating, is I believe what you and I can learn from and what we can do in our culture as well, is first let me tell you what he didn't do. Paul walks in and he sees this polytheistic society with all these people doing weird things over at this shrine and over at this temple. He didn't go in there Bible thumping, laser finger pointing, and he didn't do that. He didn't go in there and just totally condemn these people for who they were and what they were doing. That wasn't his tactic. And we see that tactic sometime in our faith, but that's not what he does. What he thinks, I'll show this to you, but I think what he does is he meets people where they are, and he uses the stuff that they're familiar with, and he uses the things that are most relevant to them during their time, ultimately to proclaim Christ. Watch how he does this. He says this at the very beginning. He says, I walked around town, and I see y'all are pretty religious. He starts off with where they are. Not a condemning thing. He says, you're religious. I see that you're looking for something beyond yourselves. And I saw all your gods, and I found this one, the one that was marked to an unknown God. And he said, let's talk about that. He starts with something that was relevant to them. Let's talk about this. Again, not condemning, but he talks about that. And then he uses some of their own poetry. I don't know if you caught that there, but he says, he said, in him we live and move and have our being. And something else he also quotes, for we too are his offspring. Those aren't his words. He pulled those out of the Greek poetry that was hip at the time. These people would have been used to those words. And I think that's awesome what he does there. He takes the of their time. He takes the elements of their culture of the time, and he brings that into the conversation. He starts off with where the people are and what is most relevant to them and what those people knew, what they were familiar with, for the purpose of bringing them knowledge to something he believes that they just didn't know. It's a fascinating way to think about ministry and how it is that we share Christ with people. Back to that church. Poor Raleigh, he was up there with me, and I'm kind of church nerd up there. I know it was, I just was fascinated by all this stuff. Raleigh was probably ready to go after about a half hour. We saw the window, kind of wanted to go, but I'm going down in all these little areas to find out about the church because I'm kind of nerdy about that. And so many cool things that were in there. I told you about the organ. You can't see it real well, but in the kind of right in the middle to the right there, you see a part of the huge window there. But just in front of that is a baptismal font. We have one that's out of wood, but that is the oldest baptismal font in all of the United States. It was built in like the 1100s. They're just so proud of this thing. It was built out of the ruins from Rome. I don't remember for sure how they got it, but it's a fascinating piece that is up there. And so we're going through all this stuff, and they spent $400,000 on that organ, and man, I'd like to hear Joanne up there pounding on those keys and pulling the stops out and making those pipes do the things that they would do. We got about ready to go, and the guy that was helping us around, and I looked out and I saw those seats and what a gorgeous place this was. And I said, how many are worshiping? 35. About 35 people in that church, that beautiful church with all that they have, and they worship around 35. I was just kind of dumbfounded by that. It seats, maybe 700 people. How many are worshiping? 35. I just checked when I was borrowing some pictures to share with you today, and I don't even think they're open. They're staying closed through COVID, and I'm thinking, 35 people, you can seat 600. I think you could social distance. I think there would be enough room. You could scatter them out there in that church, but I don't mean to, I'm not judging them, but I'm just fascinated, that here, this church that was built to turn of the 20th century by Clem Studebaker and all this stuff that's, drawing attention to our God, and they worship 35. Like Paul, I think we too can bring this good news. That's what he does. He brings this good news to these people. This good news that he knew he could share. And this news was about Jesus, who makes people right with the Father. And all those other things on the kind of things that maybe we call gods today, they find their proper place when we put Christ first. Those things aren't necessarily bad, but when we put them first, then they do become bad. So things like our very life and our health and our jobs and our farms and our businesses and our school, choices we're making when we think about going to college, the choices we make regarding retirement, the things that we do with our families, the things we do in our hobbies and in our entertainment. When Christ is first, those things find their correct place and they become good things. But they are not primary. He is. All of those things find their context then in our relationship with him. And there's joy then in life. That's why we have peace. That's why you and I came here to celebrate, because he's first. All that other stuff is secondary. We center our lives on him, And all that other stuff centers on him as well. But the key is, to me, is there are so many that just simply do not have the peace that you and I have because Christ is at our center. They don't even know that they're lacking that peace. I think I have been commissioned to help bring that peace to people who so desperately need him. And I think you too. I think we have all, as a church, been commissioned to do that. This is what we are to do. And perhaps we've forgotten that a bit. Perhaps that's why there's only 35 seats taken in that awesome church. If this was a real mirror, I'd like for you to look back here too. We've got some vacancies here as well, don't we? Have we maybe forgotten that just a bit? That we have so many people that are out there focused and centered on things that are not of God and that they are not of Christ. And what's cool is I think you and I have we have these unique opportunities to connect with those people in ways that others cannot, just as Paul did. Paul went in and with the relevance of the culture of the time, with the objects and with the language and with the culture and with their poetry, he shared Christ with them in their own context. And that's the beauty that I believe that you and I are supposed to be doing. Let's think about that as a church as we move forward here, to think a little bit about how it is that we would do just that. That we would take the context of the culture here in Roanoke and in the communities of Huntington and share this awesome news that you and I have and the peace we have in knowing him. Let's stand and we will close with prayer. Father, we thank you for this gift that you have given us. You've given us salvation. You've given us rightness. You've given us at oneness that comes through trusting in your Son's work. We thank you also for this work that you've given us, and we confess perhaps that we may have put that on the back burner. But remind us again through your Spirit what it is that you called us to do. To go into all the world, including these communities, to share your Son and to make disciples for him and to teach them everything about your ways and your love and your kindness. We pray these things in your Son's name. Amen. Have a great week. See you on Rally Day.
Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and